totemist, the Mosque of Absence. There are moments in life when our academic pursuits cross the threshold from intellectual curiosity into something far more profound and sometimes unsettling. As a historian, specializing in religious architecture of the Middle East, I've always approached my research with methodical detachment, believing that scholarly distance was essential to objective analysis. But my experience in Cairo last winter has fundamentally altered not just my approach to my work, but my understanding of reality itself. I first heard about the phenomenon during a coffee break with Professor Nassar, a colleague at the American University in Cairo. We'd been discussing the architectural evolution of mosques during the Mamluk period when he lowered his voice, leaning across the small cafe table. "There are stories," he said, his weathered face suddenly serious, "of a mosque that appears only on certain nights." I remember smiling politely, assuming he was sharing local folklore, the kind of urban legend that often attaches itself to ancient cities with layered histories. "Every culture has its ghost stories," I replied, stirring my coffee absently. "This isn't about ghosts, Dr. Mitchell," Professor Nassar said, his eyes holding mine with unusual intensity. "It's about places that exist between the fabric of what we understand as reality. The locals call it Masjid al-Ghaib, the Mosque of Absence." Something in his tone gave me pause. Nassar was a respected academic, not known for flights of fancy. His reputation for rigorous scholarship had drawn me to collaborate with him in the first place. "You're speaking as if you believe this mosque actually exists," I said carefully. He sat back, suddenly looking tired. "I've heard the call to prayer on nights when the city feels different. Followed it once, almost 20 years ago. I found myself in an unfamiliar district, standing before doors that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight." He shook his head. "I didn't enter. Something held me back. But others have." "And," I prompted, "they don't speak of what they saw, or can't." He abruptly changed the subject, returning to our discussion of Mamluk architecture with forced casualness. I should have left it at that, filed it away as an interesting bit of local mythology, and continued with my planned research. Yet over the following weeks, I found myself bringing up the vanishing mosque in conversations with other academics, shopkeepers, and taxi drivers. Most responded with laughter or blank stares of disinterest. But there were others, a handful, whose eyes would grow distant, who would nod slowly but say nothing, before eventually warning me not to answer the call. The more dismissals and warnings I received, the more my academic curiosity intensified. What cultural or historical kernel of truth had sprouted into this persistent urban legend? Was there perhaps an abandoned mosque, accessed only by those in the know, that had spawned these tales? These questions led me to spend evenings wandering Cairo's less touristic neighborhoods, listening for anomalies in the regular calls to prayer that punctuate the city's soundscape. For weeks, nothing unusual occurred. I began to feel foolish, a Western academic chasing shadows, seduced by Orientalist notions of Eastern mysticism. Then came that night. I had been working late in my temporary apartment, reviewing photographs of mosque interiors for a forthcoming paper. Around 11 p.m., I stepped onto my small balcony for fresh air. The city spread below in its tapestry of lights and sounds. The winter air felt unusually crisp, carrying sounds with remarkable clarity, distant car horns, fragments of music, conversations from streets away. That's when I heard it, the adhan, the Islamic call to prayer, but at an hour when no muezzin would normally be calling. The sound seemed to drift from everywhere and nowhere, as if the air itself were singing. Unlike the familiar cadence of the city's muezzins, this call contained subtle variations in tone and rhythm that raised the fine hairs on my arms. Hayya ala salah, it sang, come to prayer, but the words seemed to stretch and distort at their edges, the final syllables lingering too long. Without conscious decision, I found myself dressing, grabbing my coat and recorder. The academic in me reasoned that I was simply investigating an acoustic anomaly, or perhaps a special service at a mosque I hadn't yet documented. But deeper down, I recognized the pull of something beyond rational explanation. The streets felt different that night, emptier than usual. The shadows between streetlights somehow more pronounced. I followed the call, which maintained its consistent volume regardless of which direction I turned, as if it were playing inside my own head. Yet I knew it was external, because it occasionally competed with the city's ambient noise. My journey led me through increasingly unfamiliar neighborhoods, narrow alleys opening to small squares, then more winding passages. Cairo's layout is famously labyrinthine, Tet. When I checked my location on my phone, the blue dot pulsed in places that didn't correspond to any known street pattern. After what felt like an hour of walking, I entered an alleyway that should have been a dead end according to my mental map. Instead, it widened unexpectedly into a modest square, dominated by a structure that hadn't been there during the day. Couldn't have been there, given the surrounding buildings I knew existed. Its architecture was classical Ottoman, pointed arches, a modest dome, a single minaret. Yet something about its proportions felt subtly wrong, as if designed by someone who had only seen mosques in dreams. The stone appeared ancient, weathered by centuries, yet with an odd sheen that caught the moonlight like something damp. The call to prayer had stopped, replaced by a deep, resonant hum emanating from within the building. People, ordinary-looking Cairenes, were entering through its doors, their expressions serene but vacant. My academic interest overcame my growing unease. If this was some secret congregation, some sect that gathered in hidden places, it represented a fascinating footnote in Islamic religious practice. I approached the entrance, where no one stopped me or questioned my obvious foreignness. "Is this Masjid al-Ghaib?" I asked a middle-aged man beside me in Arabic. He turned slowly, his eyes taking too long to focus on my face. "It is the place between places," he replied, his voice flat, "where the faithful come when called." "Called by whom?" I pressed. His expression remained unchanging. "By what waits within, that which has always waited." Before I could ask another question, he moved inside, and I followed. The interior defied physical possibility. While the exterior suggested a modest neighborhood mosque, inside stretched a vast hall that would have rivaled the grandest mosques of Istanbul or Isfahan. Rows of columns extended farther than the eye could see, supporting arches that soared to impossible heights, gradually fading into darkness. Most disorienting was the sense that the space continued to expand as I observed it, columns multiplying in my peripheral vision, the ceiling climbing higher whenever I glanced upward, the The mathematics of the space, something I'd studied professionally for years, felt fundamentally wrong, angles connecting in ways that strained my comprehension. Scattered throughout this impossible architecture were worshippers, hundreds of them, arranged in the typical rows of congregational prayer. They knelt and prostrated in perfect unison, yet no imam led them from the front. Instead, all faced toward the far wall, where something about the quality of darkness differed from mere absence of light. It was a void, not metaphorically, but literally, a section of reality that seemed removed, revealing a nothingness that hurt my eyes to observe directly. The darkness there had texture and depth, like a pool of liquid shadow. Most disturbing was how it seemed to pulse with slow, rhythmic movements, as if breathing. The worshippers rose and bowed toward this void, murmuring prayers in a language that resembled Arabic, but with phonemes that human vocal cords shouldn't have been able to produce. The air felt increasingly thin, each breath providing less oxygen than it should. My rational mind manufactured explanations. A hallucinogen in the air, an elaborate hoax, a dream state triggered by exhaustion. But these attempts at rationalization felt hollow against the profound wrongness permeating the space. When several worshippers turned to look at me, their faces expressionless, but their eyes too fixed, too attentive, I finally acknowledged my fear. This was no cultural experience to document. Whatever was happening here existed outside the boundaries of my understanding, and quite possibly outside the boundaries of safety. I began retreating toward the entrance, trying to appear casual, while moving as quickly as I dared. No one attempted to stop me, yet I felt the attention of the congregation shift subtly in my direction, like plants turning toward sunlight. The doorway through which I'd entered was still visible, a rectangle of normal Cairo night framed by ancient stones. But with each step I took toward it, it seemed to recede slightly, or perhaps shrink, an optical illusion I desperately tried to attribute to fear and unusual lighting. The humming sound that filled the mosque began to modulate, forming patterns that almost resembled words. The congregants' prayers synchronized with this sound, creating harmonics that made my teeth vibrate. The sensation of being observed intensified, not from the people around me, but from the void itself. I abandoned all pretense of calm and ran for the doorway, which now appeared only half its original size and continued to contract. Behind me, the harmonics rose to a crescendo, and the quality of light changed, as if something massive had shifted position. 10 feet from the exit, now barely large enough for a child to squeeze through, I made the mistake of looking back. The void at the far end of the impossible mosque was no longer formless. A seam had appeared in its center, widening slowly like an aperture, like an eye larger than should have been possible, with an iris of such profound darkness that it seemed to absorb rather than reflect the mosque's dim light. And within that darkness, pinpricks of light like distant stars, suggesting depths beyond comprehension. The eye focused directly on me with unmistakable awareness, recognition. What happened next remains fragmented in my memory. I recall lunging for the doorway, now no larger than a mail slot, a pressure against my entire body as if the air had become thick as water. A sensation of being simultaneously pulled backward and pushed through a space too small to accommodate me. Then darkness. I awoke on a bench in Al-Azhar Park just after dawn, my clothes intact, but coated in a fine dust that matched no geological sample I've been able to identify since. My recorder contained nothing but static, with occasional sounds like distant waves breaking. In the months since that night, I've abandoned my research and returned to the States, where I've taken a teaching position focused exclusively on introductory courses. I've declined all invitations to return to Cairo or participate in Middle Eastern archaeological projects. I still wake sometimes, hearing that distorted call to prayer, feeling the gaze of something vast and patient. On those nights, I remind myself that some forms of knowledge aren't meant to be understood. The Papyrus Always Hungry. The travel blogs never mentioned anything about the narrow alleyway tucked between a spice market and a cafe on Al Muiz Street. My Cairo trip had been meticulously planned through online forums and guidebooks, yet somehow this particular detour wasn't documented anywhere. Perhaps that should have been my first warning. I'd been wandering the historic district for hours, my introverted nature both exhausted and exhilarated by the sensory overload of colors, sounds, and fragrances that danced through the ancient streets. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, and I sought refuge in the shadows between buildings, which is how I stumbled upon the shop. The storefront was modest, weathered wood painted in faded turquoise, with a small sign that read, "Papyrus Treasures," in both Arabic and English. Unlike the other tourist shops, with their bright displays and eager salespeople, this one sat in quiet dignity, as if waiting patiently for the right customer. Just a quick look, I promised myself, pushing open the heavy wooden door. A small bell announced my entrance, its delicate chime dissolving into the stillness. The interior was significantly cooler than the street outside, and the air carried the distinct scent of antiquity, like old books and dried herbs. Shelves lined the walls, filled with scrolls of various sizes, some displayed, open to reveal intricate hieroglyphics and illustrations. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet space. From behind a beaded curtain at the back of the shop emerged an elderly man, his movements deliberate and unhurried. His face, mapped with wrinkles, broke into a gentle smile. "Welcome, traveler," he said in accented English. "Please, explore freely. The scrolls have stories to tell." "Thank you," I replied, drawn to a glass case in the center of the room. "Your shop isn't on any of the tourist maps." The old man chuckled softly. "Some treasures are meant to be discovered, not advertised," he responded, his eyes twinkling with what I interpreted as harmless mischief. I nodded, focusing on the case before me. Inside were what appeared to be older scrolls, more carefully preserved than those on the shelves. But it was one particular scroll that caught my attention, smaller than the others, bound with a simple red cord, the papyrus appearing unusually pristine despite its apparent age. "That one speaks to you?" the shopkeeper asked. I started, not having heard him approach. "It's beautiful," I admitted. "How old is it?" "Age becomes irrelevant with certain artifacts," he replied cryptically. "Would you like to hold it?" Before I could respond, he had unlocked the case and was carefully lifting the scroll, holding it out to me with both hands as if presenting a precious gift. I hesitated before accepting it, surprised by its unexpected warmth. The papyrus felt almost alive against my fingertips, as if it had been sitting in sunlight rather than inside a case in this dim shop. "It's warm," I observed, turning it over carefully. The shopkeeper's expression remained unchanged. The ancient ones believed papyrus retained the essence of the reeds from which it was made, living things that continue to hold warmth and energy long after transformation. I studied the scroll, noticing that although it was sealed with the red cord, there appeared to be writing visible beneath the first layer. The symbols seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. A trick of the light, I assumed. "How much?" I asked, surprising myself. I hadn't planned on purchasing souvenirs beyond a few postcards, yet I couldn't bear the thought of leaving without this peculiar object. "For you?" The old man tilted his head, considering. 300 pounds. It was less than 20 American dollars, suspiciously affordable for what appeared to be an authentic artifact. I should have questioned this, should have wondered why something seemingly valuable would be priced so modestly. Instead, I eagerly counted out the bills, handing them over without hesitation. The shopkeeper nodded, satisfied. "It is chosen wisely," he murmured, so softly I wasn't sure I had heard correctly. "Pardon?" I asked. "You have chosen wisely," he repeated, louder this time. "A perfect memento of your journey." He wrapped the scroll in brown paper before returning it to me. Our transaction complete, I thanked him and made my way back to the door, pausing as my hand touched the handle. "I'd like to come back tomorrow," I said, turning. "Could you tell me the exact address so I can find my way?" The shop was empty. The beaded curtain hung motionless. No sign of the elderly man. Perhaps he had stepped into a back room. I called out once more, but received no response. Slightly unnerved, but attributing it to cultural differences in customer service, I exited the shop, making mental notes about the surrounding landmarks to help me find my way back. Later that evening, in my hotel room, I carefully unwrapped the scroll. The warmth remained, even hours after purchase. I gently untied the red cord, curious about the writing I had glimpsed earlier. The papyrus unfurled smoothly, revealing rows of hieroglyphics and symbols I didn't recognize. Some appeared traditional, reminiscent of those I had seen in the Egyptian museum that morning, while others seemed older, more abstract, patterns rather than pictures. I took photos with my phone, planning to research their meaning online. Strangely, when I checked the images, the symbols appeared blurred, as if my hand had been shaking, though I was certain it hadn't been. Too tired to puzzle over it further, I carefully re-rolled the scroll, retied the cord, and placed it on the nightstand before turning out the light. My sleep that night was adventurous, filled with dreams of endless corridors lined with papyrus reeds that whispered as I passed. In my dreams, the hieroglyphics from the scroll floated before me, rearranging themselves into patterns that almost made sense before dissolving again. I awoke before sunrise, feeling unusually alert. The scroll sat on my nightstand, exactly where I had left it, yet something seemed different. I reached for it, finding it even warmer than before, almost hot to the touch. Curiosity overcoming caution, I untied the cord again and unrolled the papyrus under the harsh light of the bedside lamp. The symbols had changed. Where there had been perhaps 5 lines of hieroglyphics the night before, there were now 7, with new symbols appearing at the bottom of the scroll. The additional glyphs seemed to shimmer slightly, as if the ink were still wet, though when I cautiously touched one, my finger came away clean. My first thought was that I had somehow purchased a clever tourist novelty, perhaps heat-activated ink or some chemical reaction that revealed hidden text over time. It was unusual, certainly, but not impossible to explain. To test my theory, I took new photos of the scroll, comparing them side by side with those from the night before. The differences were undeniable, yet somehow the camera still couldn't capture the symbols clearly. They appeared as indistinct smudges in every shot. I decided to return to the shop that morning for answers. After a quick continental breakfast, I retraced my steps from the previous day, navigating through the winding streets until I reached the alley where the papyrus shop had been. It wasn't there. I stood bewildered, looking from the spice market to the cafe. The space between them had narrowed, as if the two buildings had shifted overnight to close the gap where papyrus treasures had stood. I asked shopkeepers in neighboring stores about the papyrus shop, but received only confused looks and headshakes in response. No such shop here, an English-speaking cafe owner told me firmly. Perhaps in Khan el-Khalili market, many papyrus sellers there. I pulled out my phone, intending to check my location on the map, when I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the screen. A figure standing behind me that I couldn't see when I turned around. Just a momentary impression of a tall silhouette with indistinct features where a face should have been. Heart racing, I hurried back to my hotel, the scroll now feeling uncomfortably warm through my bag. That evening, I found myself reluctant to untie the red cord again, yet compelled by an undeniable curiosity. When I finally did, the changes were even more pronounced. 9 lines of text now, with the newest symbols appearing more complex, almost artistic in their design. I spent hours researching online, trying to translate or at least identify the style of hieroglyphics on the scroll. The closest match seemed to be Demotic script, the everyday writing of ancient Egypt, but even that comparison felt inadequate. These symbols contained elements I couldn't find referenced in any scholarly articles or museum collections. Sleep evaded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the symbols floating in darkness. Around 3 in the morning, I got up to use the bathroom, avoiding looking in the mirror as I washed my hands. A new habit, born from an inexplicable sense of dread. As I turned to leave, movement in the mirror caught my eye. Against my better judgment, I looked up. My reflection stared back, normal at first glance. But behind me stood a figure, tall and thin, wearing what appeared to be ancient Egyptian clothing. Its face a blank canvas of skin with no features, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth emptiness. I whirled around, finding the bathroom empty save for myself. When I reluctantly looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone, but something about my own reflection seemed subtly wrong, as if my movements were slightly delayed, my expressions not quite synchronized with my emotions. The next morning, I decided to cut my trip short. Whatever novelty or trick the scroll embodied, it was affecting my well-being. I booked a flight for the following day and packed my bags, deliberately leaving the scroll on the desk rather than tucking it away with my belongings. Yet when I returned from a brief outing to cancel my remaining tour reservations, the scroll had somehow made its way into my carry-on bag. I removed it, placing it in the hotel room safe instead. Hours later, preparing for bed, I found it on my pillow. This cycle repeated with every attempt to distance myself from the object. By nightfall, I had surrendered to its persistence, keeping it on the nightstand as I tried to sleep, the red cord secured tightly around it. In the morning, I found the cord untied, the scroll open beside me. The hieroglyphics now covered the entire surface, with the newest line of symbols appearing more familiar somehow, almost like handwriting I recognized. My flight was scheduled for early afternoon. I showered and dressed quickly, keeping the scroll in sight at all times. As I prepared to leave the room, a final impulse led me to examine the newest symbols more closely. With a jolt of recognition that sent ice through my veins, I realized why they looked familiar. The last line of hieroglyphics matched my own handwriting perfectly, as if I had inscribed them myself in a language I neither spoke nor understood. Overwhelmed by the implications, I grabbed a pen, feeling compelled to trace one of the symbols on my wrist. An eye-like shape that had appeared repeatedly throughout the scroll. The ink from the pen seemed to sink into my skin more deeply than it should have, spreading outward in thin tendrils like a living thing seeking purchase. I tried to wipe it away, but it only darkened, the lines becoming more pronounced. I looked up at the mirror across the room and saw the faceless figure clearly now, standing not behind but beside me, its blank visage turned in my direction, as if in observation or expectation. A wave of dizziness overtook me. The room tilted sideways, the walls seeming to flatten and stretch into an endless expanse of papyrus. The last thing I remember clearly was reaching out toward my own reflection, my fingertips connecting not with cool glass, but with a surface that gave way like water. When awareness returned, everything had changed. I existed in 2 dimensions, my body and thoughts transformed into careful brushstrokes of ink on ancient paper. Around me stretched lines of hieroglyphics, stories of others who had come before, their experiences captured in symbolic form. I can see the world beyond the scroll, as if through a window, watching as hands lift and turn the papyrus that now contains my essence. Sometimes it's the elderly shopkeeper studying his newest acquisition with satisfaction. Other times it's tourists or collectors admiring what they perceive as merely beautiful ancient artwork. They cannot interpret the warnings written in these symbols, do not understand that what they hold is both artifact and living record. They cannot hear our collective whispers as new hands untie the red cord, revealing secrets that should remain bound. From within this inked prison, I watch and wait. The scroll grows warmer as it seeks its next contributor. The papyrus always hungry for new stories, new experiences, new consciousness to absorb. 311. I still hesitate to share this experience, partly because I'm trying to process what happened, and partly because I worry no one will believe me as someone who spent 3 years traveling as part of my modest but growing YouTube channel. I've stayed in countless hotels across 6 continents, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened at the Luxor Valley Hotel in Egypt last month. The irony is that I'd chosen this destination specifically because it wasn't on most travelers' radars yet. New construction, competitive rates, and proximity to some lesser-known archaeological sites made it perfect content for my channel's focus on hidden gems for budget-conscious millennials. The hotel had only been open for 4 months, built on what the pamphlets proudly described as recently excavated historical grounds dating back to the New Kingdom period. When I first arrived, exhausted from 20 hours of travel, I was immediately struck by the contrast between the hotel's ultra-modern glass exterior and the ancient landscape surrounding it. Sand-colored mountains loomed in the distance, and archaeological tents dotted the periphery where ongoing excavations continued. The lobby featured glass cases displaying artifacts supposedly found during the hotel's construction, small pottery fragments, beads, and what looked like pieces of papyrus with faded hieroglyphics. "We're very excited to have you with us, Mr. Stein," the receptionist said with a practiced smile as she handed me my room key. "Your stay coincides with some fascinating new discoveries in the excavation area. The archaeological team has just uncovered what appears to be an undisturbed chamber beneath what is now our east wing." "That sounds incredible," I replied, already mentally scripting the video introduction I'd film later. "Is it possible to get footage near the site?" Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm afraid the archaeological zone is restricted to authorized personnel only. University regulations. But our marketing team can provide approved footage for your content if you'd like." I nodded, unsurprised by the restriction, but slightly disappointed. "I understand. My room has a view of the excavation site though, right? That's what I requested when booking." "Yes, you're in room 311, East Wing, 3rd floor. Excellent view of both the mountains and the primary excavation area." She gestured toward the elevators. "Please enjoy your stay, and don't hesitate to contact the front desk if you need anything." The room exceeded my expectations, spacious and modern with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the stark beauty of the landscape. I immediately set up my main camera on a tripod to capture a time-lapse of the sunset over the excavation site, where tiny figures in wide-brimmed hats moved deliberately around what looked like a large, rectangular pit covered with canopies. I spent that first evening organizing equipment and planning my shooting schedule for the following day. Around midnight, I finally crawled into bed, setting an alarm for sunrise filming. The fatigue of travel pulled me quickly into a deep sleep. Then came the first night. I jolted awake suddenly, heart pounding. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:11 a.m. The room felt unusually cold, and something had clearly disturbed my sleep. I lay still, listening, trying to identify what had awakened me. That's when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound coming from somewhere in the room. I sat up, turning on the bedside lamp, and realized the sound was emanating from the air conditioning vent near the ceiling. It sounded like whispering, continuous, urgent whispering in what I initially assumed must be Arabic, though as I listened more carefully, it didn't match the cadence of Arabic I'd heard throughout my travels in Egypt, or other Arabic-speaking countries for that matter. This was something older, with harsh consonants and elongated vowels that seemed to flow together in a disquieting rhythm. I got out of bed and approached the vent, phone in hand to record the strange sound. The whispers became more distinct, yet I couldn't make out a single word. The sound continued uninterrupted for about 2 minutes, then abruptly stopped. I stood frozen for several moments, waiting to see if it would resume. When it didn't, I returned to bed, chalking it up to some peculiar acoustic phenomenon, perhaps conversations from another room being carried through the ventilation system. Unusual, but not inexplicable. The next day passed uneventfully. I filmed around the hotel grounds and visited a nearby temple complex, creating what I thought would be compelling content for my channel. I mentioned the strange nighttime whispers to a hotel staff member while at lunch, framing it as a curious anecdote rather than a complaint. "The hotel is still new," he responded with a dismissive wave. "Sometimes the ventilation system makes strange noises as it adjusts to temperature changes. Nothing to worry about." His explanation seemed reasonable enough, though something about his quick dismissal felt rehearsed, as if I weren't the first guest to mention unusual sounds. That night, I fell asleep reviewing footage on my laptop, and once again, I woke with a start at exactly 3:11 a.m., the room noticeably colder than when I'd fallen asleep. This time, the whispering from the vent was louder, more insistent. I grabbed my DSLR, which was still set up on the tripod near the window, and positioned it toward the vent, hitting record. The whispering continued for precisely 4 minutes before stopping abruptly, just as it had the previous night. I returned to bed, feeling uneasy but determined to review the recording in the morning, when I was more alert. When morning came, I almost forgot about the night's disturbance until I transferred the video files to my laptop. What I saw made my blood run cold. The audio had captured the whispering perfectly, but what shocked me was that the camera's automatic subtitle feature, which I often used when filming in noisy environments, had attempted to transcribe the sounds. According to the subtitles, scattered words in English appeared amid the unknown language. Beneath, waiting, Stein. My name, my own name, was in those whispers. More disturbing was when I increased the volume and listened through with headphones. Beneath the foreign whispers, barely audible, was what sounded like my own voice, echoing the unknown words a split second after they were spoken. I replayed the recording multiple times, convincing myself I must be mistaken. But there it was, unmistakably my own vocal pattern and inflection, whispering words I didn't understand. I considered checking out immediately, but realized how irrational that would seem. What would I tell the hotel management? That I was leaving because of whispers in the ventilation system that somehow knew my name and mimicked my voice? They'd think I was having a mental breakdown, or worse, that I was trying to create fake, haunted hotel content for views, hurting their reputation in the process. So I stayed, but took precautions. I moved the bed away from the wall with the vent. I set up all 3 of my cameras around the room, positioned to capture different angles. If something happened again, I would have comprehensive documentation. The third night, I tried to stay awake until 3:11 a.m., but exhaustion overcame me around 2:30. I woke again at exactly 3:11, this time to whispers so loud they seemed to fill the entire room. The temperature had dropped dramatically. I could see my breath misting in the air. All my cameras were recording, their small red lights the only illumination besides the clock's digital display. The whispers seemed to be coming not just from the vent now, but from the walls themselves, the floor, even the ceiling. I lay paralyzed, listening as my own voice became more prominent in the chorus of whispers, no longer echoing, but leading the unknown words. And then, absolute silence. Even the constant low hum of the air conditioning had stopped. The silence felt heavy, pressing against my ears until I heard a distinct click, the sound of my room door unlocking from the outside. I watched, frozen, as the door slowly swung open, revealing nothing but darkness in the hallway beyond. No light from emergency exit signs. No ambient glow from outdoor lighting through windows. Just complete, impenetrable darkness. A voice, my voice, called from the darkness, "Come see what we found." Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to hide under the covers, but my body moved of its own accord. I found myself walking toward the open door, into the darkness, unable to control my movements. The next thing I remember with clarity is waking up in complete darkness, lying on what felt like cold stone. My first panicked thought was that I'd lost my vision, but when I fumbled for my phone in my pocket and turned on its flashlight, I realized the truth was far worse. I was in a chamber of some kind, underground, with walls of rough-hewn stone. The ceiling was low, no more than 7 feet high, and the room extended in all directions beyond the reach of my phone's light. When I directed the light toward the nearest wall, I saw what made me scream for the first time since this ordeal began. Carved into the stone, in different sizes and depths, but unmistakably clear, was my name. Stein. Hundreds of times, thousands of times. Some carvings looked centuries old, worn and weathered. Others appeared freshly cut, with stone dust still visible in the crevices. I stumbled backward, sweeping my light across the other walls, only to find the same horrifying sight. My name, covering every inch of wall space, floor to ceiling. In a chamber that had to predate the hotel by thousands of years. Some carvings were accompanied by hieroglyphics I couldn't understand. Others had small pictograms beside them, crude drawings that resembled a human figure lying horizontal, perhaps sleeping, or perhaps in a sarcophagus. I tried calling for help, but there was no cell service. I searched desperately for an exit, running my hands along the walls between the carvings, looking for a door or passage of any kind. After what felt like hours, I found a rectangular outline that seemed different from the surrounding stone. When I pressed against it, it gave way slightly. I pushed with all my strength, and a section of wall moved inward, revealing a narrow passage illuminated by electric lights, clearly a modern addition. I followed it, disoriented and terrified, eventually emerging into what appeared to be a museum-like space with glass cases and informational placards. A security guard sat at a desk near the entrance, visibly startled by my appearance. "Sir, this area is restricted," he exclaimed, standing quickly. "How did you get in here?" I couldn't form coherent words, just pointed back toward the passage I'd emerged from. The guard called for assistance on his radio, and within minutes, I was surrounded by hotel security and 2 individuals in clothing marked with university logos. "Mr. Stein," one of the university representatives said, her tone both concerned and suspicious. "You've entered a secured archaeological site without authorization. Can you explain how you accessed this area?" I tried to explain what had happened. The whispers, waking up in the chamber, my name carved into the walls thousands of times. As I spoke, their expressions changed from suspicion to concern of a different kind. The woman exchanged glances with her colleague before addressing me again. "Mr. Stein, the chamber you're describing doesn't exist. We've mapped the entire subterranean complex beneath the hotel. There is no room with writing on the walls as you've described." "I was just there," I insisted. "Take me back, I'll show you." They humored me, following as I led them back to the passage. But when we reached where the rectangular door had been, there was only solid wall, with no indication a passage had ever existed. Tests later showed I had elevated levels of carbon monoxide in my bloodstream, which the hotel attributed to a previously undetected leak in my room's heating system. They suggested this could explain my vivid hallucinations and sleepwalking to the archaeological site, apologized profusely, and offered a full refund plus compensation. I accepted their explanation because I needed some way to rationalize what happened. I checked out that morning and booked a flight home, abandoning my content plans entirely. But here's what I haven't told anyone until now. When I was packing my equipment, I reviewed the footage from that night. All 3 cameras had captured the whispers, exactly as I'd heard them. They recorded the door opening to darkness, and my walking trance-like through it. After that, they recorded 7 hours of an empty room before I reappeared through the hotel room door at precisely 10:22 a.m., covered in a fine layer of ancient dust, my fingertips raw and bleeding as if I'd been scratching at stone. I haven't uploaded any videos since returning home. Every night, without fail, I wake at 3:11 a.m. to the sound of whispering coming from somewhere inside the walls of my bedroom. My own voice, speaking words in an ancient language I somehow understand now, but cannot bring myself to translate for you here. If you like these stories, feel free to subscribe to the Totemist channel for more. It contributes to the creation of more horror stories.